The girl in the dumpster identified after 40 years, but murder mystery remains. Before we dive in, kindly hit the subscribe button and let us know where you are watching from in the comment. It was cold that morning. A dull gray sky hung over the city like a warning. Rainwater dripped from the corners of rusted buildings. The air smelled like rot and old metal. And behind a grocery store in Henderson, Nevada, a man taking out trash found something he would never forget. A body. He thought it was a mannequin at first. Pale. Still. Thrown away like garbage. But as he stepped closer, the truth hit him. The smell. The bruises. The horror. It wasn't a mannequin. It was a girl. Police arrived within minutes. Yellow tape went up. Reporters hovered nearby. The parking lot filled with flashing lights. Officers moved quietly. Everyone knew what they were seeing wasn't just another crime. Felt colder, more personal. The girl had been beaten, strangled, her clothes torn, her shoes missing, and her face unrecognizable. There was no ID, no purse, no fingerprints that matched anyone in the system. No one who claimed her. She was a mystery, a life erased, a name stolen. The detectives called her Jane Doe #82-041, a number on a file, a ghost in a folder. But that number would haunt them for decades. Detective Raymond Cole stood over the dumpster, silent. He'd seen death before, but something about this one felt wrong. Too clean, yet too cruel. No signs of robbery, no sexual assault, no defensive wounds. It was as if the killer wanted her found, but not known. Cole crouched beside the body. He studied her hair, dark brown, shoulder length, dyed recently. He looked at her fingernails, broken, scratched, like she fought hard, but lost. He whispered to himself, "Who are you?" Days passed, then weeks, then months. No one came forward. No missing person matched her face. Every clue ended in silence. The newspapers moved on. Headlines faded. The public forgot. But not Cole. He couldn't. He visited her grave once a month. A small stone marked Jane Doe 1980s. No name, no birth date, just a mystery. Time moved fast. Technology changed. Officers retired. Case files gathered dust. The world forgot the girl in the dumpster. But her photo remained on a wall in the police station. Eyes that once had life now stared through the years, begging for someone to remember, and someone would. But not yet. 40 years later, a young detective named Maya Ortiz reopened the file. It was part of a new cold case initiative. Hundreds of unsolved murders being re-examined with modern tech. Most were too degraded, too old, too far gone. But when Maya opened this one, she froze. The photo hit her like a punch. That face, that dumpster, that hopeless story. Something about it screamed unfinished. She flipped through the yellowed pages. Autopsy. No leads. DNA swabs unprocessed. The old detective's notes were barely readable. But one line caught her eye. "Feels like she was meant to be found," Maya whispered. "Then let's find her." In 2023, technology could do what 1983 couldn't. The DNA, long forgotten, was sent for advanced analysis. Every strand of hair, every trace under her nails, re-examined with forensic precision. They ran it through GeneMatch, the public genetic database used for genealogy. Weeks passed. Nothing. Then, a hit. Not a full match, but close. A distant cousin somewhere in Kentucky. Maya called the lead. An older woman answered. "Yes, ma'am. My name's Detective Ortiz. I'm with the Henderson Police Department in Nevada. I'm calling regarding a possible family connection to a cold case." There was silence on the line. Then a shaky voice. "Cold case? I don't have anyone missing." Maya hesitated. "Do you have any relatives who disappeared in the early 1980s? A pause. Then, "Well, my cousin's daughter ran away back then. No one ever found her." Maya's heart pounded. "What was her name?" The woman whispered. "Her name was Sherry Lynn." They compared DNA, sample to sample, base by base. And when the results came back, Maya felt her throat tighten. It was a match. The girl in the dumpster finally had a name. Sherry Lynn Jarvis. Missing since 1980. 16 years old. 40 years. 40 years of silence. Of unanswered prayers. Of cold nights in an unmarked grave. And now, they knew who she was. But knowing who didn't explain why, or how, or who did it. The mystery had cracked open, but inside was something darker. Detective Ortiz couldn't sleep. Every night, she replayed Sherry's story in her head. A teenager, far from home, dumped behind a store like she never mattered. Why Henderson? Why there? Why her? She searched old newspapers, missing person bulletins, runaway reports. Piece by piece, a picture formed. Sherry Lynn wasn't just any runaway. She was running from something. In 1980, Sherry had been living in Connecticut. She'd left home after a fight. Her mother said she was rebellious. Her father said she was scared. She'd been seen hitchhiking across state lines. Heading west, the last confirmed sighting, a truck stop in Texas. After that, nothing. Until the dumpster. Maya dug deeper. She cross-referenced every known violent offender in the area in 1980. And one name stood out. Joseph Red Halpern, truck driver. Convicted in 1984 for kidnapping and assault. Known for picking up teenage hitchhikers. He'd worked routes from Texas to Nevada. The same path Sherry had taken. He died in prison in 2002. But his DNA was still on file. They tested it. The sample from under Sherry's fingernails. Against Halpern's DNA. Days turned to weeks. Every hour felt longer. Then came the result. Not a match. Halpern wasn't her killer. The trail went cold again. Maya sat alone in her office that night. The clock ticked past midnight. Sherry's photo stared at her from the wall. Those brown eyes. That faint smile. Frozen in time. She whispered, "Who did this to you?" And somewhere deep inside, she swore she heard the answer. Not words, just a feeling, a pull, like the case wasn't finished. Like Sherry's ghost wasn't ready to rest. The truth was close, closer than anyone realized. And the next clue was already waiting in the evidence room. The scene was chaos. Police tape fluttered in the cold morning wind. Reporters circled like vultures. But behind the flashing lights and distant sirens, one haunting truth remained. No one knew who she was. A young woman, found dumped like garbage. No ID, no witnesses, no answers. Detective Robert Jenkins stood over the body, his breath forming pale clouds in the December air. He'd seen hundreds of death scenes, but this one, it felt different. Something about her stillness, the way her hand was curled, almost as if she'd been reaching for help that never came. The crime scene unit worked silently, snapping photos, collecting fibers, dusting the dumpster for prints. There were none. No purse, no jewelry, no shoes. Her clothes were cheap, mismatched. It looked like someone had stripped her of everything, even her identity. At the county morgue, the autopsy began the next day. The pathologist, Dr. Elaine Cooper, had worked dozens of homicide cases. But when she pulled back the sheet and saw the girl's face, she paused. "This one's young," she whispered. "Late teens, maybe 20. The report would later confirm it. Female, Caucasian, between 18 and 22. Cause of death, blunt force trauma to the head. The blow had crushed part of her skull. Instant, effortless, brutal. There were bruises on her arms, signs of restraint. And her fingernails were broken, as if she had fought back. But against who? Jenkins knew this case would be tough. No missing persons matched her description. The city didn't care. Just another Jane Doe in a long line of forgotten victims. But Jenkins couldn't let it go. Something about her eyes, even lifeless, seemed to beg for justice. He ordered sketches. He sent her fingerprints to every law enforcement database in the country. Nothing. He even paid for an artist to create a clay reconstruction of her face. It was eerie, too lifelike. When the model was unveiled, reporters called her the girl in the dumpster. That's the name that stuck. Weeks turned into months. The police followed every lead they could. A truck driver claimed he'd seen a young woman hitchhiking along Route 23 a few nights before. She looked scared, he said, dirty, hungry, but the timeline didn't fit. And when they brought him in for questioning, his story kept changing. Another witness thought she'd seen the girl at a diner, sitting alone, eating a slice of pie, staring out the window like she was waiting for someone who never came. But when detectives checked the security footage, the tape had been reused. Erased. Gone. By the third month, the case was cold. The file grew thicker with every false lead. Detectives rotated out. The city moved on. But Jenkins didn't. He visited her grave often. It wasn't much. Just a small marker that read Jane Doe 1980. Sometimes he'd talk to her, tell her about new cases, promise her he'd find out who she was. Years passed. DNA was still a dream of the future. There were no databases, no digital records, just paper, files, photographs fading with time. Every so often, someone would call the police station, thinking they'd found her identity. A missing daughter, a runaway sister, a young woman who never came home. Each time, Jenkins would reopen the file, and each time it led nowhere. In 1995, 15 years after the discovery, new technology arrived. DNA profiling, a game-changer in law enforcement. Jenkins, now nearing retirement, made one final request. He asked to exhume Jane Doe's remains. He wanted to run her DNA. The request was denied. Budget issues, they said. Too old, too cold, too costly. But Jenkins didn't stop. He contacted labs himself, wrote letters, begged for help. Most ignored him, until one day, a forensic anthropologist named Dr. Laura Hines called back. "I saw the case file," she said. "I want to help." Dr. Hines was relentless. She used what little DNA she could extract from the girl's bones. The sample was fragile, barely enough to test. She ran it through every database available. Still nothing. But she didn't give up. She stored the DNA, preserving it for future technology that didn't exist yet. "I have a feeling," she told Jenkins. "One day we'll know who she is." Jenkins retired that same year, but he left her file on his desk, right at the top of the stack. He wanted every detective who walked into that office to see it, to remember her. Years became decades. The world changed. DNA technology exploded. Ancestry databases were born. And deep inside a cold storage lab, the girl's DNA waited, silent, untouched, until 2020. That's when Detective Sarah Monroe, a young investigator with the same department Jenkins once led, stumbled upon the old case while doing inventory. She read every page, every note, every line, and when she saw the words, Jane Doe, unidentified, written over and over, something inside her clicked. "I'm reopening this," she said. Monroe reached out to a company specializing in forensic genealogy, a revolutionary method that used public DNA databases to trace family trees. The process wasn't quick. Months passed, then a year. But one morning the email came. Match found. The name of the girl in the dumpster was finally revealed. Her name was Sharon Lee Gordon, 19 years old, from Tennessee, a runaway, reported missing in 1980. She'd left home after a fight with her parents, never to be seen again. Detective Monroe stared at the screen for a long time. She could almost hear Jenkins' voice in her head. "One day we'll know who she is." That day had come, but the relief was short-lived, because when she started digging into Sharon's background, things got strange, very strange. Her parents had moved years ago and refused to talk. Her old friends said she was involved with a much older man before she vanished. Someone dangerous. Rumors whispered of a group that lured young women with promises of freedom, only to trap them in something dark and twisted. A cult. And that man was still alive. Monroe's hands trembled as she looked at the faded photos of Sharon. The same soft smile. The same eyes that Jenkins couldn't forget. The girl in the dumpster finally had a name, but the question that mattered most, who killed her, was still unanswered. And as Monroe dug deeper into the cult rumors, she discovered something chilling. Every woman connected to that group had vanished. One by one, their disappearances never solved. It wasn't just murder anymore. It was something far darker. And Sharon's death was only the beginning. For more chilling true crime stories, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to the channel. The name came up again and again. In police interviews, in rumors whispered through small-town diners, in old newspaper clippings yellowed with time. The Prophet, that's what they called him. A man whose real name had been buried under layers of aliases, lies, and fear. He led a group they called themselves the Light of Evermore. To outsiders, they were a spiritual collective. To those who escaped, they were something much darker. Detective Sarah Monroe leaned over her desk, surrounded by stacks of paper, photos, and case notes. Everywhere she looked, Sharon's face stared back at her. Young, full of hope, unaware that her search for belonging would lead to death. The cult had operated in Tennessee in the late 1970s. They lived in an abandoned farmhouse deep in the woods outside Murfreesboro. No electricity, no phones, just a leader who promised salvation through obedience. The prophet preached that the world was ending, and only his chosen followers would be spared. He demanded everything: their faith, their money, their bodies. Sharon Gordon had joined the group 6 months before she vanished. Monroe opened an old report from 1981. The FBI had investigated the Light of Evermore for suspected human trafficking, but never made arrests. The prophet had vanished before agents arrived. The farm burned to the ground a week later. No one was ever charged. Vanished? Monroe muttered under her breath. Just like Sharon. She called the FBI field office in Nashville, hoping anyone, still remembered the case. An old agent picked up. His name was Frank Delaney, retired, but still sharp. When Monroe mentioned the prophet, the line went silent for a few seconds. Then Delaney said, "You found her, didn't you?" Monroe froze. "How did you know?" "I knew one day someone would. We always thought she was one of his victims." He told her that back in 1980, the prophet had around 30 followers, mostly young women. They worked odd jobs, handed over their paychecks, and lived under his control. Anyone who tried to leave disappeared. Monroe needed a name, a real one. Delaney gave her a starting point, an old arrest record from 1978. The man had once been known as Daniel Ray Porter. Born in Texas, drifter, convicted of fraud and assault. He'd reinvented himself as the Prophet after a short stint in prison. Porter was charismatic, manipulative, a master at finding lost souls and convincing them he could save them. Monroe spent weeks tracking down the surviving members of the cult. Most had changed names and moved on, trying to forget. But one woman agreed to talk. Her name was Lydia Marsh. She was in her 60s now, living in a quiet nursing home in Georgia. When Monroe visited, Lydia looked frail, her hands trembling as she clutched a cross. "I didn't think anyone would ever come," she whispered. Lydia's voice was soft but steady as she spoke. "We believed in him," she said. "He said he could heal us, that he spoke to angels. He told us to leave our families behind because they didn't understand the truth." She paused, tears filling her eyes. "Then, things changed." "What do you mean?" Monroe asked. Lydia's face hardened. "He started talking about purification, said some souls were too tainted to ascend." Monroe felt a chill crawl up her spine. Lydia went on. "One night, he said one of the girls had sinned. He said she'd tried to run away. Her name was Sharon." Monroe leaned forward, her pulse pounding. "What happened to her?" Lydia's voice cracked. "He made us watch. He said she had to be cleansed. He hit her, again and again. And then she stopped moving. Silence filled the room. Even the ticking of the clock seemed to vanish. "He told us to get rid of her body," Lydia said. "We were scared. He said if we disobeyed, we'd be next." "So you put her in the dumpster?" Monroe whispered. Lydia nodded slowly, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I still see her face every night," she said. "I hear him screaming. I can't forget." Monroe's hands were shaking as she recorded every word. After 40 years, she finally had an eyewitness. But she needed proof. Something tangible. "Do you know where he went?" she asked. Lydia hesitated. "He said he was going west. Said there were others waiting for him in the desert. People who believed he was the second coming." Monroe's mind raced. The desert. That could mean Nevada, Arizona, New Mexico, somewhere remote, somewhere he could hide. She dug into databases, old records, tax filings, anything connected to the name Daniel Ray Porter. Then she found it. A land purchase in 1983. A small property outside Reno, Nevada, registered under a shell company. No known residents. Monroe booked a flight. The Nevada desert stretched endlessly beneath her plane. Dry. Empty. The kind of place where people and secrets disappeared. When she arrived, she drove for miles until she reached a rusted gate with a hand-painted sign that read, "The Light of Evermore Returns." Her stomach tightened. He was here. The property was eerily quiet. A few old trailers, a half-broken windmill, a barn that looked ready to collapse. But then she saw something that made her heart race. A man standing in the doorway of the barn, watching her. He was old now, gray hair hanging to his shoulders, a long beard covering most of his face. But the eyes, those cold, piercing eyes, they matched the photo from 1978. Daniel Ray Porter, the prophet. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice gravelly but calm. Monroe flashed her badge. "Detective Monroe, I need to ask you a few questions about Sharon Gordon." He didn't flinch, didn't even blink. Instead, he smiled. "Ah, Sharon, the lost one." Monroe's pulse quickened. "You remember her?" "How could I forget?" he said softly. "She was chosen, but she turned away from the light." His tone sent a chill through her. "Did you kill her?" He tilted his head. "Kill? No, I delivered her." Delivered her? To the next world. She wasn't ready for this one. Monroe's hand hovered near her holster. The old man's eyes glinted in the sun. "She doubted," he said, "and doubt is the enemy of truth." Monroe felt anger burn through her chest. "You left her in a dumpster." He smiled again, slow, deliberate. "She chose her fate." The tension snapped. Monroe stepped forward, pulling out her cuffs. "Daniel Porter, you're under arrest for the murder of Sharon Gordon." But before she could move another inch, a voice shouted from behind. "Stop!" Monroe spun around and froze. 3 people stood behind her. 2 men, 1 woman, all dressed in white robes. Their eyes were blank, devoted, lost. One of them held a shotgun. "She's not here to help us," the woman said coldly. "She's here to destroy the light." Monroe's heart pounded. She was outnumbered, outgunned. The prophet raised his hand slowly. "My children," he said. "Let her go. She will witness the truth soon enough." The followers hesitated, then lowered their weapons. Monroe backed away slowly, her hands trembling. She knew she couldn't take them all. Not here, not now. She got in her car and drove until the compound was a distant blur in her rearview mirror. Back in Reno, she called for backup. The local sheriff's office launched a raid that same night. But when they arrived, the place was empty. Trailers abandoned. The barn burned to the ground. Every trace of the prophet gone. Just like in 1980, Monroe stared at the flames lighting up the desert sky. 40 years. 2 generations. The desert was silent. Too silent. Wind hissed over cracked sand and jagged stones, carrying the ghosts of 100 forgotten souls. Detective Sarah Monroe stood in the middle of it all, her boots crunching on dry dirt. The sun beat down like a curse, and beneath her, she knew there were bodies. The prophet was gone. His cult compound burned to ashes. But the land itself, it still spoke. Monroe had been searching the area for 2 days straight. She and her small team of crime scene techs had combed through every trailer, every trench, every scrap of scorched wood. Nothing. Until now. "Detective," one of the techs called out. He was kneeling near a patch of disturbed sand, a small metal detector beeping faintly beside him. "What is it?" she asked, jogging over. "Something under here, about 2 feet down." Monroe dropped to her knees, heart pounding. They began to dig carefully, pushing aside layers of sand and stone. Within minutes, the shape began to form. A small, shallow pit, and inside it bone. Not animal, human. The first skeleton was small, female, barely 20. Her wrists were bound with what looked like ancient rope. Her skull fractured. Monroe stared, her throat tightening. Another girl, another victim. The prophet hadn't stopped with Sharon Gordon. He'd kept going. The team widened their search grid. By sunset, they'd found 5 more graves. All women, all young, all buried facing the same direction, toward the rising sun. He called it rebirth, Monroe whispered. Every detail screamed ritual. Every angle pointed to the same truth: these were sacrifices. Back at the temporary command post, Monroe studied the evidence photos laid out across the table. 6 women, different ages, different towns, all missing during the 1980s, all connected to one man, but he was gone again, like smoke in the wind. She didn't sleep that night. Her mind kept replaying Lydia's words. He said Sharon wasn't the first. Now she knew. There were more, maybe dozens. And somewhere out there, the prophet was still watching. Morning brought new urgency. The FBI had joined the case now. Special Agent Marcus Hale was assigned to lead the federal side. He was blunt, confident, and unimpressed with local detectives. "You've done good work, Monroe," he said, flipping through her reports. "But we're dealing with a ghost. He's been off the grid for 40 years. Monroe's eyes narrowed. "Ghosts leave footprints." Hale smirked. "Then let's find his." The investigation exploded in scope. They dug into financial trails, old utility bills, property records, even underground cult forums. And slowly, a pattern began to form. The prophet had been moving, not hiding, recruiting. Every few years, small gatherings popped up under new names. The Light Reborn, the Sons of Evermore, the Path to Purity. Different names, same voice, same teachings. Each time, he vanished before law enforcement could act. It was like chasing a phantom. But then, a break. A gas station clerk outside Albuquerque reported a strange man buying supplies. Long beard, robes, surrounded by 3 younger followers. He'd paid in cash and left behind a pamphlet. The title read, "The Light Returns, Salvation in the Desert." Monroe stared at it. The same phrase painted on the compound gate. "He's recruiting again," she said. "And he's close." She and Hale flew to New Mexico the next morning. The air was dry, thin, electric with tension. They drove for hours, following dirt roads that led nowhere. But on the 4th day, a local rancher came forward. He'd seen a group of weirdos camping in the hills north of Santa Fe, always at night, always singing. Monroe's stomach twisted. She knew what that meant. They weren't singing, they were praying. That night, they found it. A new camp, hidden in the cliffs. Lanterns flickering in the darkness. Through binoculars, Monroe counted at least a dozen people. And in the center, a man with gray hair, arms raised to the sky. The prophet. Her pulse quickened. He was real, alive, and he was still leading them. They couldn't risk a confrontation without backup. So Monroe waited, watched, listened. Through the night, she heard his voice echo across the rocks. "The world has forgotten the light," he said, "but the chosen will rise again." Every follower dropped to their knees, chanting in unison. It was hypnotic, terrifying. Monroe whispered into her radio, "He's performing a ritual. We need to move. Now." The raid came at dawn. Flashbangs shattered the morning silence. Agents swarmed the camp. Screams erupted. Followers scattered. Smoke filled the air. Monroe pushed through the chaos, shouting commands. "Hands up! Drop your weapons!" In the center of the camp, the prophet stood calmly, hands raised. As if waiting, she aimed her gun at him. "Daniel Ray Porter, you're under arrest." He smiled faintly. "You finally found me." They cuffed him without resistance. He didn't fight, didn't speak, just smiled. Back at headquarters, he sat across from Monroe in the interrogation room, hands folded neatly on the table. 40 years, she said. You ran for 40 years. He shrugged. I walked with faith. You murdered Sharon Gordon. He tilted his head. Murdered? No, I freed her. Monroe slammed her hand on the table. You dumped her in a dumpster like trash. He flinched just slightly but said nothing. She leaned forward, voice low. Tell me where the others are. Tell me why. The prophet's eyes glimmered. There are no graves, he said softly. There are only seeds. Monroe frowned. What does that mean? He smiled again, the same cold smile from the desert. You'll see. Soon. That night, Monroe couldn't shake his words. There are only seeds. She replayed the interrogation footage again and again. Something was off. He wasn't afraid. He wasn't broken. He was waiting for something. 2 days later, it happened. The news broke at dawn. An explosion at the Santa Fe detention center. A gas leak, they said. But Monroe knew better. When she arrived, the scene was chaos. Smoke, fire, sirens. And in the middle of it, empty cells. The prophet was gone. Panic swept through law enforcement. How could an 80-year-old man escape a federal facility? It didn't make sense. Until Monroe reviewed the security footage. The guard who released him wasn't just any guard. She was one of the followers from the camp. She'd infiltrated the jail staff months earlier under a fake name. When the explosion hit, she opened his cell. They walked out together, calm, unhurried, like they'd been planning it all along. Monroe slammed her fist on the desk. He'd outsmarted them again. Hale stormed into the room, furious. We've got every agency in the Southwest on alert, he said. But he could be anywhere. Monroe shook her head. No, he's not running. What do you mean? He's finishing something. She pulled out the old cult map recovered from the compound fire. There was a symbol scrawled in red ink, a sun with 6 rays. Next to it, a handwritten phrase, "The 7th shall rise." 6 bodies in the desert, 6 victims, 6 sacrifices. The 7th, Monroe whispered, hasn't happened yet. They traced the prophet's known travel routes, highways, abandoned churches, rural properties once owned by his shell companies. Then Hale pointed to one, an abandoned church outside Flagstaff, Arizona, recently purchased under a new LLC. Monroe's blood ran cold. That's where he's going. They drove through the night, sirens cutting through the desert silence. The storm came without warning. Lightning ripped across the night sky as rain hammered down on the small Tennessee town that had finally learned the girl's name. Elaine Harper. That was her name. After 40 long years of being the girl in the dumpster, she finally had her identity back. But what no one expected was what came next. Detective Rachel Moran stood in her car, staring at the old case file spread across the passenger seat. The papers were damp from her shaking hands. She couldn't stop reading the autopsy report, line by line, like it was the first time she'd seen it. Bruising on the wrists, rope fibers, a blow to the back of the head, death by blunt force trauma. None of it made sense. Elaine Harper disappeared in 1985. She was only 17 years old, a runaway, a ghost, until DNA finally spoke for her 40 years later. Rachel's radio crackled. Detective Moran, you're gonna want to see this. It was Chief Harris. His voice sounded off, uneasy. Rachel pulled up to the abandoned mill on the edge of town, the same place where Elaine's body had been dumped all those years ago. The rain fell heavier now, turning the dirt into dark mud. Officers were already there. Their flashlights flickered through the shadows. Something had been dug up. Ma'am, an officer said. We found this behind the old foundation wall. He handed Rachel a small rusted tin box, sealed shut with electrical tape. Rachel peeled it open. Inside were photographs, old, color-faded pictures of teenage girls. Dozens of them. Each photo had a name written on the back. Elaine Harper, Marlene Voss, Joanna Pike. All girls who had gone missing between 1984 and 1986. Rachel felt her throat tighten. What the hell is this? She whispered. Chief Harris looked pale. I think we just opened a door we can't close. The rain roared against the metal roof. Rachel flipped through the photos again, until one of them stopped her cold. The man standing in the background. Same man in every single photo. Always just far enough away to not be noticed. Always watching. His face was thin, sharp jawline, glasses, and something about his eyes empty, calculating. Rachel's breath caught. She knew that face. She raced back to her car and opened the digital database. Facial recognition scanned the image in seconds. The name popped up on the screen. Harold Benton. Rachel's blood ran cold. Benton was a retired police officer, one who had worked the original case. She could barely believe it. Back in 1985, Benton had led the initial investigation. He'd been the one to call off the search after only 2 weeks. He'd even testified that Elaine was likely a runaway. Rachel's pulse thundered. She looked back at the tin box. He'd kept souvenirs. By midnight, she had a warrant. She and her team drove straight to Benton's cabin in the woods. A small, rotting shack hidden behind miles of trees. When they got there, the place was quiet. Too quiet. The front door was ajar. Rachel drew her weapon and stepped inside. The smell hit first. Rot. Decay. Then she saw the walls. Photos. Newspapers. Strings connecting every girl's name. At the center of it all, a large black and white picture of Elaine Harper, circled in red. Words scrawled beneath it in shaky handwriting. She was the one that got away. Rachel froze. In that moment, she realized the truth. Elaine hadn't been his first. She'd been his mistake. A creak from the hallway. Rachel turned fast, gun raised. A shadow moved. Police! Step out where I can see you. No answer. She edged closer, heart hammering in her chest. Another step. Another creak. Then a voice. Low. Broken. You shouldn't have come here. Benton emerged from the dark. Older now. Hair gray. Eyes hollow. But his smile, that was the same one from the photos. He didn't run. He didn't raise his hands. He just stared at her like he'd been waiting. I knew someone would find her one day, he said softly. DNA never forgets. Rachel's finger tightened on the trigger. Why Harold? Why the girls? His eyes flickered toward the photo of Elaine. She lied to me, he whispered. They all did. I just wanted them to tell the truth. It was over in seconds. Benton reached for something under the table, a gun, and Rachel fired. One shot, straight to the chest. He collapsed, gasping. The rain outside grew louder, drowning out his final words. Check the river, he whispered. Then silence. The next morning, divers found 3 more bodies in the river behind Benton's cabin. All young girls, all from the same missing persons list. But one of them wasn't Elaine. It was someone else. Someone who'd been reported missing after Benton retired, which meant someone else had continued his work. The FBI took over the case. Rachel watched from the sidelines as they packed up the evidence. Benton's cabin, the tin box, the photos, all gone into storage. But the question still haunted her. If Benton had been dead for years before the last girl disappeared, who put that body in the river? Months later, Rachel sat in her office late at night. Rain tapped against the windows again, just like that first night. She opened her laptop and scrolled through cold case photos. And there it was, a photo from Benton's old files. A man standing next to him at a police conference, smiling. Same jawline, same eyes. Harold Benton's son. Rachel felt the chill spread through her veins. She picked up her phone and dialed Chief Harris. When he answered, she didn't waste time. It's not over, she said quietly. He's still out there. Outside, thunder cracked again. Somewhere in the dark, a car engine started. A man in a raincoat watched Rachel's window from the street. And for a brief second, just before he disappeared into the night, his face caught the glow of a streetlight. Those same empty eyes, that same cold smile. The legacy had continued. For more chilling true crime stories, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to the channel.